Hi, boys and girls, welcome back. Guess what? I'm wearing a scarf. Do you know why I'm wearing this scarf? It's Christmas colors because I'm gonna start reading some Christmas books. I'm gonna start with my favorite all time, Christmas Tapestry by Patricia Polacco. Always makes me tear up. I love it. I hope you will too. Let's start with our riddle first. What does Mrs. Claus say to Santa when she sees clouds in the sky? Think about it. The Christmas Tapestry by Patricia Polacco. It's both illustrated and written by Patricia Polacco. There are those who say there is no balance in the universe and that all things happen randomly without purpose. Take, for instance, one Jonathan Jefferson Weeks. He was most upset that his family came all the way from Memphis, Tennessee, when his father accepted a position of pastor at the New Baptist in Detroit. Even though their new home was on the outskirts, it was still Detroit, nothing like Tennessee. What possible good reason could there be for leaving home and coming here? Jonathan Jefferson Weeks' church in Memphis had been so beautiful, new and gleaming. Everyone loved to come to his father's services, and Jonathan loved his school. He had just made it on the soccer team, and even though he was a PK, preacher's kid, his friends didn't treat him any different than anyone else. Here in Detroit, Michigan, his father's new church was practically falling down. It was rickety and old, and the parsonage was right next door. Here, everything about his life screamed, PK! Why don't we come here, Daddy? Beth asked her father at dinner one night. The church looks awful. Nobody will come to our services. The deacon sent your father here because this little church is in such need of new life, Jonathan's mother said. Your father made our church in Memphis into something beautiful, didn't he? You should have seen it when we were first arrived. It couldn't have been as bad as this place, Jonathan said. Oh, but Jonathan, it was worse. His father smiled. Their parents took them into the living room and pulled out a photo album from the packing boxes. Jonathan and Beth couldn't believe their eyes. Their father was right. The Tennessee church had been worse, far worse. How did you do it? Jonathan asked. Just the way I'm going to do it here, but I need both of you to help me. There's the hard work that it's going to take to repair and rebuild this church, but I also need you to be cheerful and brave. When you see what we're going to do with the church, your spirits will be lifted. Beth and Jonathan tried to smile. I predict by let's see this very Christmas the church will be something that we will all be proud of, their father said. When it is finished, people will come. You'll see. Even though Beth and Jonathan missed Memphis, they threw themselves into the tasks that were assigned to them. For that whole summer, they both helped clear out trash, cut back bushes, mow the lawns, plant bulbs for next spring. They scrubbed floors, washed walls, even helped with the painting. When school started, they were all so involved with the rebuilding of the church, they didn't even miss their old friends. They were making new ones. By fall, not only was the church looking better, but Sunday services were getting more and more crowded. Jonathan's father was just what this neighborhood needed. Folks were very friendly now, and everyone was anxious to help. Even Jonathan's new classmates came to help paint. It seemed that everything that the neighbors and friends and family did was turning the church into a beautiful place. As fall stretched into winter, the church was almost finished. Jonathan's father was right. It would be perfect for Christmas. Here, Dad, Jonathan said as he handed up a loaded paintbrush to his father on a stepladder one December day. Reverend Weeks dabbed the last spot of paint on the sacristy wall. There, now the artist can paint the wonderful scene we planned, he said. It's going to be a glorious painting of our Lord. Jonathan could hardly wait to see the painting, and it would be in time for Christmas Eve. Jonathan walked over to the window and watched the snow steadily falling outside. I've heard this blizzard may be coming, Dad, and here in Michigan, a blizzard can be real bad. I've heard that too, but the parsonage is warm and cozy, and so is our new church, Reverend Weeks said, as he hugged Jonathan. It won't bother us at all. The next week brought worse snow than had ever been seen in Detroit in 25 years. One morning, Mr. Brown, the caretaker, knocked at the parsonage door. He looked full of dread. Reverend Weeks, come quickly. Jonathan, Beth, and their parents rushed next door. As they entered the church, they all gasped. A dark water stain covered the sacristy wall, right where the painting of our Lord was to be. Ice built up on the edge of the roof and held back the water, Mr. Brown said sadly. Standing water that ran into the building and down the wall. How can this be happening? Mrs. Weeks cried. The artist we commissioned to do the painting was going to start tomorrow. Isn't there anything we can do, Reverend? Asked Mr. Brown. We can chip the ice and let the standing water on the roof. He lightly pushed the watery wall. There was a huge crack, a rush of water, and a piece of plaster fell with a thud. Dad, Jonathan cried out. Now there's going to be a big, ugly hole in the wall, right where everybody will see it. I even see wooden slats. I know a plasterer, Mr. Zukor. He'll be able to fix it for us, Mr. Brown said. Before Christmas Eve? Jonathan asked, full of hope. No, sir, Mr. Brown said. This here wall needs to dry out first. The plastering may not be done until spring. I knew something would spoil our Christmas, Jonathan cried. Now, I'll call Mr. Zucker anyways. He may have a different solution, Mr. Brown added softly. Later that night, Reverend Weeks sat on the edge of Jonathan's bed. I miss home. I know you believe God always has a plan, but what plan could have brought us here? Jonathan sobbed. We worked so hard, and then God sent us a blizzard. I don't understand. Well, son, although we don't always understand the universe unfolds as it should, his father said as he rocked the boy in his arms. Tomorrow will be another day. Perhaps things won't seem as bleak when you wake up to a new morning. Then he kissed the boy goodnight and closed the door. The next morning, Jonathan awoke to a cold snap and freezing snow. His mother asked his father to drive him to Detroit to pick up Christmas decorations she had ordered from Horrocks. Jonathan didn't want to go. He felt so bad about the church wall. What good would decorations do? Then, as if the damage of the church wasn't bad enough, the battery was dead in the family car. It's all right, Jonathan. We can take the bus. Jonathan's face fell. The slow old bus all the way downtown and back? Why do we need decorations? The church is ruined. Everybody will just sit and look at the hole in the wall, Jonathan said as they boarded the bus. Downtown, Jonathan and his father slogged through freezing snow. The wind stung their faces. After they had picked up the decorations, they stepped into an alley to get out of the bitter wind. It wasn't an alley, really, because it was lined by little odd shops. Antiques mostly. Jonathan and his father leaned against one of the windows and caught their breath for a moment. Jonathan turned toward the window. That's when he saw it. It was the most beautiful-looking piece of cloth he had ever seen. Dad, look! Jonathan pulled his father to see. Isn't it magnificent, his father said. Wait, if that cloth is big enough, couldn't we buy it and hang it over the hole in the wall? Jonathan pleaded. The colors even look like Christmas. Sorry, son, I have $15 and some change for the bus. That cloth looks like it would cost more than I can afford. He looked in the boy's eyes, so disappointed. Well, at least we can go in and look. There's the cloth right there. The shopkeeper spread the beautiful cloth out on the table. Look, Jonathan, hand-stitched embroidery, Reverend Weeks said as he gazed at the cloth. And the perfect size, Dad. See, Jonathan said as he touched it. Reverend Weeks looked up. How much is this? He asked timidly. I've had that old piece here for over a year. For you, Pastor, I'll make it a deal. How's $15 sound? That would be fine, perfectly fine, Reverend Weeks beamed as the storekeeper wrapped the beautiful tapestry in brown paper. Jonathan, you had an inspired idea, his father said to him, and they made their way to the bus stop. Jonathan and his father waited and waited at the bus stop. The wind burned as it stirred up waves of crystal snow. Reverend Weeks stepped onto the cold street, leaned out to see if the bus was coming, but there was no sign of it. Do you think the weather's so bad that they've stopped the bus service? Jonathan asked his father. No, it's just late. I'm sure it's just late, his father reassured. Jonathan shivered with bitter cold. It's always late, a voice came out of the white, misty snow. There on the bench was an old lady. The bus, it's always late, she said, as she motioned towards them. Reverend Weeks smiled at her. Jonathan tried to stand behind his father out of the bitter wind. In my country, Winters are worse than this. Like the razor the wind cuts. I have hot tea in my thermos and some raisin cookies too, she said, as she motioned for them to sit with her. Have some with me. I would like nothing more on this day than to share a little warm tea with you and your boy. Jonathan looked at his father. Please? We would be much obliged, ma'am, Reverend Weeks said as he tipped his hat. The hot tea and the cookies made the wind seem to disappear. How far do you have to go today if the bus ever gets here, Jonathan asked the lady. Well, first the 52, then 2 more transfers before I'll be home, she answered. Ma'am, if the bus comes, the way is shorter to my house, Reverend Weeks said. I have to drop off this package at my church, but I have a car there. By now the battery is charged, and I would be pleased indeed. In this cold, I will accept. Surely I will, she said with a broad smile. If the bus ever comes, the 3 of them said in unison and laughed. The bus finally did come, and the 3 of them rode through the light snow to Reverend Weeks' church to drop off the package. Mrs. Weeks made more hot tea and shared some special cakes too. Can we put up the cloth, Dad, before we go, just to see what it looks like? Jonathan pleaded. He could hardly wait. I'm in no hurry, the old woman smiled. Jonathan and his father hung the cloth right over the gaping hole. Our Christmas tapestry, Jonathan announced. The old lady gasped. Where did you get this? She asked. Breathlessly, she looked pale as snow. From an antique store just before we met you, Jonathan said. The old lady walked up to the cloth, took out a pair of glasses, and looked at it closely. I made this, she said in a whisper. Tears streamed down her face. In Germany, almost 60 years ago. I sewed it with my own hands. She held up the cloth with her gnarled fingers. My applique, my family symbols. There, do you see, child? Are you sure, Reverend Weeks asked? This was impossible. She lifted one of the corners, then looked inside. Those are my initials. Jonathan could see 3 letters. Stitched them myself when I was about to become a bride. Reverend Weeks started to take the tapestry down. Surely then you should have this blessed cloth back. The woman thought for a moment and then moved away. No, here it belongs. Somehow it has made its way all the way from Germany. It is meant to be here on your wall in this place, in this time. I can feel it. Her voice trailed off. She took her seat again and sipped her tea. Many years ago, when I married, this was used as my wedding chuppah, the canopy over me and my beloved. Then it was the coverlet of our marriage bed. If there had been children, it would have been wrapped. They all would have been wrapped in this to be named. Her voice trailed off again and her jaw tightened. But then the Nazis came. My people were rounded up, herded like animals. The SS came first for our neighbors and finally for us. What happened? Jonathan asked as he squeezed his father's hand. When they came, my young husband was torn from my arms. We were separated. All the women and children were thrown in the railroad car, and the men and boys into another. I shall never forget the sweet eyes, the way he looked at me. I never saw him again. We were all sent to concentration camps. She pulled up her sleeve and showed a row of faded blue numbers in the middle of her lower arm. I'm speechless. No words can describe, Reverend Weeks said as the whole family leaned toward the lady. Jonathan beamed as he looked towards his father's face. Then he hugged the old woman. Would you stay for prayer services tonight, Reverend Weeks suddenly asked, and have supper with us? I'm honored you ask, but I'm not of your faith, the woman said. Tonight I will say my own prayers and light the menorah and share some of your lovely tea cakes with my cats. But another time I would love to share a feast with you. Do you have family to share your holiday, Reverend Weeks worried? No husband. I never married again. But I do have nieces and nephews here in Detroit. We shall cherish this wondrous tapestry. And even if our walls are repaired, we shall keep it here hanging to commemorate your memories, dear Lady, Reverend Weeks whispered. The whole family drove home with her. It was Christmas Eve. There was to be a pageant. Jonathan was going to be a shepherd in the procession of the Christ child. Beth and her mother were practicing hymns for their choir. The service was to commence promptly at 6 o'clock. That morning there was a knock at the front door. Mr. Brown had brought a plasterer to inspect the damage. "We didn't expect you to come on such short notice, and especially on Christmas Eve," Reverend Weeks said as he shook the man's hand. "Zukor! Joaquin Zukor," the old man said. "For me it is a festival of lights. I live alone. No one will miss me today," Mr. Zukor said with a warm smile. "This is where the damage is," Reverend Weeks said as they all entered the church together. Reverend Weeks pulled the tapestry back so that the old man could see the hole in the wall. Mr. Zukor put on his glasses and inspected the damage very carefully. "This won't be difficult. Not difficult at all," he said. "You do need to let the wall dry a bit, but I can make it like new." "I'm glad to hear that. We were also worried the damage was structural," Reverend Weeks said. He let the tapestry cascade back in front of the hole. The old man staggered back. "Where? Where did you get this? Where?" "Right here in Detroit," Jonathan tried to explain. "It couldn't possibly be," Mr. Zukor interrupted. "Couldn't be what?" Jonathan asked. "My bride in the old country," Mr. Zukor said softly. "She made something exactly like this for our wedding. Every stitch, every pattern, all the same." Mr. Zukor started to cry. "But she was taken by the Nazis. We all were," he said breathlessly. "We were herded like sheep onto boxcars and taken to camps. Work camps they called them, but they were like places of death. I never saw her again. She did not survive that place." Jonathan looked in astonishment at his father and mother. "Did she embroider her initials on the cloth?" Reverend Weeks asked. "Why, yes, she did. How did you know that?" Mr. Zukor asked. Jonathan pulled up the lower corner. Mr. Zukor started sobbing. "RHZ, those are her initials. Ruth Hannah Zukor," the old man said as he collapsed on the first pew. "Mr. Zukor, she's alive. She was just here 3 days ago. We know right where she is," Jonathan said as he hugged Mr. Zukor. The Weeks family drove like the wind with their precious cargo. Mr. Zukor, when they arrived in front of the red brick apartment house where the old lady lived, the old man flew to the outside door, then climbed the 3 flights of stairs as if he were floating. Jonathan and Beth were out of breath. Mr. Zukor stopped in front of number 22. He waited for the longest time. Then he knocked. The door opened. The old woman stood, puzzled. Her eyes widened. Then her eyes brimming as she took his face in her hands. "Is that you, my beloved?" she whispered. "I have waited a long time. My Rachel, was all Mr. Zukor could manage to say. The sound that came from both of them, that Jonathan knew he would never hear again. It was a sound of joy. They hugged and cried and kissed each other so tenderly that Jonathan really didn't know why, but he had tears in his own eyes. I have tears in my eyes right now. Later that night, at the Christmas Eve services, the candles were radiant. Their flickering light made the tapestry shimmer as if it were enchanted. Maybe it is, Jonathan thought as he smiled to himself. He couldn't take his eyes off of it. The pageant was beautiful. The church was full of people singing praises. The lights on the Christmas tree reminded Jonathan of the twinkling stars in the night sky. Jonathan Jefferson Weeks thought of his heart would burst at the pure joy of the season and the wonder of all of the events that had taken place. Now he knew exactly why they had moved to Detroit, exactly when they did. He knew why the plaster fell, why the car didn't start, why it was bitter and cold, and that he and his father had shared tea with a lonely old woman. It was all so seamless, woven so perfectly, woven so beautifully, and surely as Jonathan's radiant cloth that hung in front of the church. It was all truly a Christmas tapestry.
That story always makes me tear up, and not of sadness, but of happiness because of the joy. Now, it is said that that story may be true. It's been told a couple of times by a couple of different people, and Patricia Polacco had heard it and retold it in her story. It's a beautiful, wonderful story for the season. Now, let's get back to our riddle. What does Mrs. Claus say to Santa when there are clouds in the sky? You ready? Looks like rain, dear. Get it, reindeer? I love you. I miss you. I'm looking forward to the holidays. I'll see you soon, boys and girls. Bye-bye.